Добрий день, шановні колеги. Я вітаю
Good
всіх.
afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to welcome all participants. I don't want to apologize from the beginning of the event, but anyway, I would like to apologize because we had to postpone several times this event. But still, it is a very important event, and I think that was actually the decision of God and the universe. Maria, we can't hear you. Thank you. So actually your name in Zoom is Emanuel Zingaris. It's quite interesting.
Так, я зараз швиденько себе перейменовую.
Okay, I will quickly rename myself.
Добре, все, Дан. Друзі, я хочу вас привітати на
Dear
нашій
friends,
дискусії.
I would like to welcome you at our discussion panel that was supposed to take part a week ago. But I think actually that this is even better that we are meeting today after the meeting, after the voting for the very important bill in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, where we yesterday actually adopted the law on indigenous people in Ukraine in the economic zone with Crimea. And I would like to thank the members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe who supported the resolution, the Crimean Tatars. And today we have already some significant achievements, and that's why this is a great platform to discuss the topic, which is becoming even more important. These are personal sanctions as the mechanism to protect human rights in occupied Crimea. Of course, all of us have a joint aim for the Ukrainian Crimea as the part of the sovereign territory of Ukraine, as it is envisaged by the Constitution of Ukraine. And recently we celebrated 25th anniversary of Ukraine, and for the Crimea to come back to Ukraine, for the people residing there to restore all the rights according to a resolution of the UN, of the Parliamentary Assembly, and the Council of Europe. And of course, we should not forget Magnitsky Act. 6 countries have already adopted legislation similar to the Magnitsky Act, not only European states, but also the United States, Estonia, United Kingdom, Canada, Lithuania, Latvia, and other countries. We also know that in December 2020, the EU Global Human Rights Sanctions regime was introduced, and additional sanctions have been introduced recently related to Crimea by our partners from the European Council. And today we are going to discuss the issues related to implementation of this mechanism for comprehensive protection of human rights in Crimea. I know that we have a small kind of a surprise. This is a presentation of a documentary, and before we start our discussion, we are going to watch a 4-minute video, which is called the following. So this is in line with the topic of our today's discussion. And now I would like to ask moderators to show this documentary. Thank you.
On November 16, 2009, auditor Sergei Magnitsky died in Matroskaya Tishina pre-trial detention center in Moscow. He worked for the consulting company Firestone Duncan, which provided legal services to the Hermitage Capital Management Fund of the American entrepreneur William Browder. Magnitsky uncovered a corruption scheme involving embezzlement of budget funds by Russian officials and security forces through tax refunds totaling 5.4 billion rubles. In 2008, he was arrested on suspicion of allegedly aiding the head of the fund, William Browder, in tax evasion. For almost a year, he was held in a pre-trial detention center. Tortures applied to him caused his death. The death of the auditor caused a wide international resonance and became the reason for the introduction of personal sanctions, which are still in force. On December 14, 2012, on the initiative of Senator Benjamin Cardin, the Magnitsky Act came into force in the United States. The law provided for the introduction of personal sanctions against persons responsible for violations of human rights and the principle of the rule of law in Russia. The law introduced visa restrictions and blocking of financial assets in the US banks for those involved in the death of Sergei Magnitsky. In 2016, the Magnitsky Act was replaced by the Global Magnitsky Act. It provides sanctions against individuals involved in corruption and human rights abuses around the world. Subsequently, the principles of the Magnitsky Act were implemented into the national legislation of Estonia, Great Britain, Canada, Lithuania, and Latvia in the form of laws or amendments to migration legislation. Legislation similar to the Global Magnitsky Act is being developed in other countries of the world. There is an initiative in the European Parliament to adopt similar legislation at the EU level. EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Joseph Borrell, said that the European Union will create a sanction mechanism in the field of human rights, similar to the Magnitsky Act in the United States. Systemic mass repressions in the occupied Crimea require a timely, consolidated response from the international community. The Crimean Tata Resource Center is working to impose personal sanctions against persons responsible for human rights violations in the occupied Crimea. The adoption of similar laws to the Magnitsky Act is an important and effective tool in preventing gross violations of human rights on the peninsula. As William Browder noted, for every person included in the Magnitsky list, there are hundreds of others who are frightened by the very possibility of being included in the list, and people change their behavior because of this. A timely and decisive response to the facts of human rights violations can save the lives and health of people in the occupied Crimea. Only with active joint counteraction to gross violations of human rights, we can protect not only the inhabitants of the occupied Crimea, but the whole world.
Дякую за показ цього.
Thank you for showing this documentary. I think
Всі згадали, чому саме
that everyone now understands and remembers why actually this act is called the Magnitsky Act. This is a personal story that actually related to hundreds and thousands of human lives. The first block of questions and topics to be discussed today, which is related to legislative and initiatives of the Ukrainian power and authorities, which are based on the Magnitsky Act, are in line with the list of our speakers today. Now, I would like to give floor to Eskender Bariev, the chairman of the board of the Crimean Tatar Resource Center, the main organizer of our today's event, for certain analysis of what has been already done, what is expected for the MPs of the Verkhovna Rada to be aware of through our councillors and our international partners. Thank you, Ms. Maria. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. We have seen the documentary with you, and the aim of this documentary is to restore in our memory and to understand how we can adopt Magnitsky type legislations to our legislation against people involved in gross violation of human rights, in particular in Crimea. And now I would like to speak in a bit in detail about these processes and to speak briefly about what has been happening in Crimea. Show the slide. I would like to ask to show the slides, and I would like to remind that there were 11 exercises that have been conducted lately by Russia. From March 2021, there has been an escalation in Crimea, and there were additional troops dislocated to Crimea, and thus Russian Federation not only tries to intimidate Ukraine, but the Western world as well. 15 ships of Russian fleet have been sent to the Black Sea, escalating the situation there, and there have been recent events related to the British naval ship and to the naval ship from Netherlands. As a result of the genocide policy, the Crimean Tatar people have become the minority in their homeland. The repressions, intimidation of Crimean Tatars who are sent out of the Crimea. More than 500,000 of Russian citizens have been brought from Russia to Crimea, while Crimean Tatars in great amounts have to leave it. According to analysis of the human rights violation in Crimea, 2020 shows the following tendencies. There are searches, detentions of those activists who try to support imprisoned during court proceedings. The third thing, these are persecution of the whole families of political prisoners, and the family of Umeram is a vivid example of the situation. And 3 men from the family have been imprisoned, and 2 daughters now suffer from persecutions. Today we have Vinera Hamun. This is the mother of the political prisoner Server Mustafayev, and she has also felt some administrative sanctions against her. Russian legislation is used to persecute Ukrainian citizens. Mass cases of not rendering healthcare support to political prisoners of Crimea. At the moment, according to the classification of the Crimean Tatar Resource Center, 131 political prisoners and those who are fingers within the political case include 158 representatives of Crimean Tatar people. 60 have been sentenced in short terms in colonies in Russia. 59 are in detention facilities. 44 Crimean Tatars. 30 have restrictions or on probation, including 19 Crimean Tatars. 33 persons are persecuted, including 27 Crimean Tatars. And this category includes people beyond Crimea, but still are the figurants of the criminal cases of the occupied authorities. For example, Mustafa Jamilov, Rifat Shubarov, Eskander Bariev, and a range of other activists. The next slide. 55 were killed during the occupation of Crimea. 25 persons were kidnapped. We should also mention that in violation of the Fourth Geneva uh, Convention, there is a mass conscription, and if people are against this, they become the figurants of criminal proceedings, and the activities of the Russian Federation are politically motivated and criminal. Sanctions can help to cope with this situation, and the EU has introduced sanctions to more than 90% and 23 legal entities, or while UK include more than 100 persons. And the sanctions of the EU related to Crimea are aimed at persons who violate Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, not against those who are involved in the human rights violations in the occupied Crimea. The list doesn't include judges, investigators, prosecutors, and representatives of other authorities who are directly involved in human rights violations in Crimea. That's why the lists are incomplete in terms of quality and quantity. And those persons who commit human rights violations have not been brought to responsibility. That's why experts of the Crimean Tatar Resource Centers have prepared the classification, which has been published on our website, envisaging several categories of these persons who violate human rights in Crimea. 166 persons are already published on the website of the Crimean Tatar Resource Center. And I can show you three names as examples. For example, Abdullayev Vadim Valerievich, head of the investigative body, head of the investigation department of the FSB of Russia for the Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol. Bordin Artem Alexeyevich, senior investigator for particularly important cases. Volkov, military prosecutor of the Department of the Military Prosecutor's Office. On the 7th of December 2020, the European Parliament adopted a resolution within the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, and that envisages the implementation of the EU global human rights sanctions regime. The European Parliament offered Ukraine to follow this example and to prepare Ukrainian version. The Crimean Tatar Resource Center have been working consistently in developing the Magnitsky type legislation in order to introduce personal sanctions against people responsible for human rights violation in Crimea. We have also developed the methodology in terms of personal sanctions against those who collaborate with the occupation administration on the occupied territories. And this will allow to prepare such lists at the public level. And that's why it is very important for such lists. And coming back to the legislation type, to the Magnitsky type legislation, it is very important to see that if not only European parliaments, but the parliaments of other countries will adopt similar legislation against those people who are also involved in human rights violations, will help to make people think before committing such crimes.
своих плечах и, соответственно, нести ответственность в будущем за свои преступления.
Meaning those representatives of official authorities. Thank you very much for your attention, and I think our mutual efforts will help us introduce personal sanctions for human rights violations and for making them an effective tool to prevent human rights violations, including in Crimea. Thank you very much for your attention.
Дуже дякуємо, щиро вдячні, пані Іскандер. Я
Thank you
зараз
very much,
надала слово
Mr.
перед тим, як
Iskander.
передати її
And
моїй колежанці Євгенії.
before
Хочу
giving
подякувати
floor
вам,
to
наша
my
пані
colleague
Євгенія
Evgenia
Знасенко,
Kravchuk
я би запросила
to
до
speak
слова
about situation
нашого
in
колегу
Ukraine, I would like first
Зігімантіса
give floor to
Павільйоніса, який є головою
Zagimantis Pavilionis,
комітету з
who is
міжнародних
the
відносин
head, the chair of
Литовського
Seimas Committee on
парламенту,
Foreign
який
Affairs
діє.
of the Republic of Lithuania
Такого законодавства. Ми знаємо,
that
що
has already similar legislation. And we know that Lithuania supports to the maximum extent possible with all possible mechanisms and tools the sovereignty of Ukraine. But as it has already been mentioned, can we go further? And what mechanisms, what additional mechanisms can we introduce? Because we have seen the decision of the Czech Republic from the 10th of June, and we were really glad and pleased to see the steps supporting Ukraine that were related to Russian officials who should be brought to international criminal responsibility for violating human rights on the territory of Ukraine. And I would like to give floor to Mr. Pavilionis.
Okay, thank you so much, friends. So I will use English if you allow me. I can switch to Russian.
Please
but,
go ahead in English, Mr. Zigimantis.
Okay, great. So yeah, as I understood from translation, you are completely right. Lithuania is really supporting Ukraine and Tatar people as much as we can. Myself, I have a little drop of Tatar blood as well, 1/8 actually. So together with Emanuel Zingers, whom I see on the screen, we are really fighting for Ukraine every day. And to make it very open and clear, we are fighting for your NATO and EU membership, as you saw in last NATO summit declaration. The next summit after 22 summit will be held in Vilnius, as I'm saying to my friends in the parliament, we have to fight that in Vilnius, in that NATO summit, we would correct the Bucharest mistakes that were made with regard to Ukraine and Georgia. That will be tough to do it in 2 years, but we will really fight for it, as well as for your EU membership. We are preparing for next Eastern Partnership Summit. We will be promoting your membership perspective. I'm just back 2 weeks ago from Berlin with Baltic chairman of Foreign Affairs. We talked with all parties in Germany, Green including, and it seems that Green Party is already including EU enlargement to Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia into its political program. That is big thing in Berlin. So we are with you. We have also created Crimean platform interparliamentary group in Lithuanian parliament. We will be present at Crimean platform summit on August 23 as well. So now coming back to Magnitsky, as Lithuania was one of the first countries to introduce it in 2017. And as you fairly noted, and it was noted in that video, the number of countries that introduced this legislation is growing. We have discussion in Moldovan parliament. We have discussion in Ukrainian parliament, and I will focus on that because I think you have to do it in your parliament as well. We have discussions in Norway, in Australia, in Japan, in Czech Parliament. And the biggest achievement was by the end of the last year when EU adopted its global, well, we call it Magnitsky Act. So now coming back to Ukraine and Lithuania, why I think it is very important for Ukrainian Rada to adopt this law. Well, I was negotiating also my country's membership to EU. I know that one of the most important argument and criteria for membership is your democratic credentials. If you show Ukraine that it is a country that really fights for democracy and human rights, not only inside the country, but in the region and globally, if you are champion of democracy and human rights, it is very easy or kind of easier to lobby your case in different Western capitals. And vice versa, if you are not implementing those democracy standards and you are not fighting with those violations, it is difficult to lobby your case, knowing that tendencies, undemocratic tendencies, you can see even in Central European countries, and that really creates big discussions. Should we really enlarge EU and NATO to countries that might step back from those processes? So be a champion. You and I'm also always telling that Ukraine is a champion of democracy, human rights, and reforms. You have recently created this group with Moldova and Georgia, and you really lead this group. For example, Ukraine was one of the first countries to join our sanctions against Belarusian regime after this terrorist attack. We applauded Ukrainian decision to stop the trade with Astrovets nuclear power energy. That is important symbolic gesture because this energy is flowing back to the Baltic states if you are not doing it. And now just few words on Lithuanian Act. So we introduced in 2017, we voted more or less, across the party dividing lines. Everybody voted in favor. So in this law, we have prohibition, kind of ban of entry to foreign citizens for 5 years who gravely violated human rights in their countries, who committed corruption crimes, also money laundering crimes. As well, we have a provision that we check the blacklists with EU and NATO states regularly, and if those states inform us about some criminals that maybe we don't have any information about, we include them into our national list. And finally, this year we made an amendment to the law actually related to some, well, I will not name those singers, but some famous Russian singers who like to make concerts in occupied Crimea. And we also banned entry into Lithuania for those foreign nationals who publicly and actively support crimes related with violation of, we call it, international law. We do not say directly about Crimea, because anyone who is promoting occupations or trying to legitimize those occupations, but also publicly, by soft power, not only those who committed those crimes, we also banned the entry, because those nice singers who like to make concerts in Crimea, for some strange reasons, they also like to come to Lithuania, and on our national days, when we defeated the occupation, they like to sing the same songs that they sing in Crimea. Strange kind of passion for this. So to conclude, be a champion in this area, adopt Magnitsky legislation in Ukrainian parliament as soon as possible. You will be then first among free associated countries to do it, because we will see how much Maya Sandu well, or her party is winning next parliamentary elections, but I'm quite sure that Maya Sandu will do everything to make Moldova champion as well. I'm not expecting, well, so big results in Georgia today, honestly, for different reasons. I will not comment them. But if you do it, the biggest and the most powerful state in Ukraine, this step, that would really impress. And then you can demand that other countries would do the same. And also, last pragmatic suggestion, as we do it with European legislation, if we have some criminals that we detect, and the biggest, well, we have about 400 people already now a blacklist. Most of them are Russians and Belarusians, regime representatives. We first involve that list into our national legislation, and then we propose to do it for other European states. And then Americans, Canadians, and Brits, they are following that example. Why I'm saying it? If you have a Ukrainian national Magnitsky legislation, you can simply call to Lithuanians and say, guys, brothers, help as usual. We then take that proposal, bring it to Brussels, bring it to Washington, to Ottawa and London, and you have a result. But for this, you need to show that leadership and introduce this legislation in Ukrainian parliament. And just my final emotional kind of little statement, I was former ambassador in Washington, D.C. That is the oldest embassy we have on this planet. And we've been waiting for 50 years. This embassy was opened during the occupation. Americans never recognized an occupation. And finally, after 50 years, we came back to your computer screens. We are more than 30 years independent and happy and safe. So, you know, keep fighting. We are with you. The Western world is not recognizing Crimean occupation. Just intensify your political and diplomatic campaigns, be example, shining example of reforms and democracy and human rights, and you will finally do it. Yeah, you know, history is on your side. Thank you.
Ačiū, thank you very much. Дякую, пан Павільйоніс. Думаю, зараз нам
Thank you very much, Mr. Pavilionis, and I think that all those who are present here, we have got a very good recipe how to achieve success and how to unite this with what we called our homework, after which we would be able to involve more international partners and require adoption of the same legislation from them. And actually, soon we will be able to reconsider the association agreement. Mr. Pavilionis mentioned Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, the pioneering countries of the Eastern Partnership, and that's why it would be great for us to adopt Magnitsky legislation in the framework of our legislation. Before I will give floor to Evgenia Kravchuk, and I would like to say that Emanuelis Zingeris have been actually mentioned today. Emanuelis, if you can hear me, please, can you?
For your intervention, as you've been mentioned, and you are our honorable colleague in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, please. Emanuelis, your microphone is off.
Emanuelis, įjunk mikrofoną ten šone, mygtukas kairiai.
There's a small button. Yes, it's on.
I know everything about small buttons. Thank you, dear Maria. Thank you, dear chairman of successful Ukrainian delegation in Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. During 30 years, more like 31 years, being in Parliament, I just following your development. And Žygis told everything what was related to our actual actions on your side. From my point of view, I will say something about the fields that can be used. For example, if just Pavilionis told us he's 1/8 Tatarian guy, my mother name is Tatarsky, and I'm Zinger from father name. My mother name is Tatarsky, and I, visited in Turkey one of the last Congress people from Crimea Tatars, most intelligent people, poets, writers, artists, academicians. It's pity to see the arranged by Putin regime ethno-cleansing attacks on Crimea Tatarian people, and we should have separated paragraph, отдельный параграф. Если можно, я буду говорить для вас оккупационном языке, на русском тоже, чтобы вам было бы, возможно, кое-кому попроще.
I'll speak actually now in Russian.
Я думаю, что отдельная статья по этнической...
That if we speak about ethnic, not cleansing, but attempt of ethnical pressure, mildly speaking, actually, if we speak about ethnical minority of the Crimean Tatars. And actually, Ukraine should have done more for them. Before Crimea was occupied by Russia, but actually Crimean Tatars is a separate topic, and we actually should have a separate sanctions in Brussels against the whole people. And actually the situation is so horrible that we should use the article about ethnical cleansing. Of course, we can speak about full ethnical cleansing now. That's why I would use different terms for this. But everyone should know what has been happening with Crimean Tatars now. It should be somehow formulated in the Ukrainian parliament for the EU and the United States to use this definition of what has been happening to Crimean Tatars now. The second issue, dear chairperson, is related to property. And I know that Andrei has been preparing a huge catalog of the stolen property which has been appropriated by so-called law enforcement officers, but this is a very nice word for these people. These are the representatives of the internal bodies of Russia, which appropriate the property through international companies, for example, Finnish private companies and other Western private firms. And of course, they use Ukrainian companies as well. This catalog of thefts of property
другие собственники, мы желали бы увидеть, чтобы начать процессы
is the one that we would like to see to start financial processes against Russian Federation. When we speak about insignificant organization. This is the Council of Europe and the Parliamentary Assembly. It would be nice to hint at the next session that the international community is also interested in investigating this theft of property in occupied Crimea, because in the Western world, theft, contrary to Eastern world, is even more important than killing someone. And that's why it is very important to work with this topic in detail to see the intentions of Moscow to occupy the territory of neighboring countries. And as Alexei Navalny, imprisoned Alexei Navalny says, there are thefts in the Kremlin. And this is like simple cases of theft of international property. And this is the second topic after ethnical half-cleansing, so to say, in Crimea. The third topic includes this is the work with the human rights courts and use of fictitious cases and claims against Ukraine on the occupied Donbas territories, as well as the territories in other parts of eastern Ukraine. There are 8,000 cases which have been applied by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, especially with the support of FSB of Russia. There are now 8,000 cases against Ukraine on the territories of Ukraine occupied by Russia. And actually, you can say that this is just funny and that we shouldn't pay attention to these cases. And we should not actually pay attention to this because this is something obvious, because everything understood that these are fictitious cases, but these cases have been registered and there is a great number of these cases, several thousand. That's why we should work with this topic separately, individually, and because the Russian Federation is now a factory producing fictitious cases. We are ready, and actually, my colleague, the Regimantis Pavilionis, has already mentioned this, that we're actually ready to support you in these cases. And this is also related to the appropriation of property in Crimea, and actually the pressure of Crimean Tatars who refuse to be the part of anti-Ukrainian Kremlin propaganda, starting with Mustafa Jamilov. And these people are actually heroes, and we highly respect them. Dear Chairperson, you know that the Lithuanian parliament invited the Crimean Tatar parliament to hold a separate session. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, there was like electricity problem at that moment in the building of the parliament. And in the resolution of our parliament, we decided to name the parliament of Crimean Tatars our colleagues, the colleagues of free parliaments in the Western world. So Crimean Tatars who now had to reside in Kiev now are our partners. And we
их мандат уважался.
believe that this parliament should be respected in the European Union, in the United States, etc., as the members of parliament of any other country. And that's why there should be an independent mandate of the Crimean Tatar parliament, that is Majlis. We would like to reiterate our support once more, and in the part of the OSCE and in the Council of Europe.
Сможем провести резолюции, которые провела.
And I think that we will be able to adopt resolutions that were promoted by you, Maria, and actually it was adopted 66 votes against 17, if I'm not mistaken. And actually, even those countries who usually supported Russia
войска с вашей границы. Внимание к вам.
Supported this resolution, and actually would like to say that we keep focusing on you, and now the world understands that actually there is a war against you, not only to conquer your property, but actually because you want to join the Western world, the European Union. And that's why the EU and the United States have understood that all actions and motives of the Kremlin are related to your decision that was adopted during Maidan to become a Western democratic country. And I'm really glad that back then we supported you in Vilnius, and when Mr. Klitschko, Mr. Tarasyuk, Mustafa Jamilov were invited to the parliamentary forum, to fight for the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement that Yanukovych refused to sign. And when Klitschko, during our parliamentary session, after and actually we had 31 representatives of countries, and the 31 delegations were waiting for your signature under the association agreement. And when Klitschko mentioned impeachment in Vilnius towards Yanukovych, and on the 28th of November, Ukraine started its way on liberation of its liberation, meaning to join in several years the European Union. And that was said by Klitschko in Lithuanian parliament. And I'm really glad that Yanukovych. And as insurance, I invited prominent pro-Ukrainian members of your political community who spoke about impeachment against Yanukovych after he refused to sign the association agreement. And actually, on the 3rd of December, I was already in Kiev on Maidan, and I was there on the stage, and I was asked if Ukraine would like to choose the European way. Around 8,000 protestants said that yes, that was your way. And this is always very important for us. And we believe that you are a future member of our community, that we should support. Please use us in terms of this support in Brussels and in Washington. And we, together with our colleagues from Warsaw, will present your interest and will protect you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And this is the day of recipes, so to say. Now we know 3 more steps to do in the Parliamentary Assembly in European Parliament in terms of ethnical cleansing and thefts. And actually, the next week we are planning we're going to meet the NGOs and official representatives to discuss the list of these thefts in Crimea. And actually, we are going to discuss these fictitious cases that have been submitted by Russia. And we will use the material of Radio for Europe and actually to work in this area. Thank you very much for your recipes and actually see you in Kiev within the Crimean platform. And now would like to give floor to Evgenia Kravchuk, who fought for Crimean Tatars in the special committee and actually who submitted amendments on behalf of our delegation that have been considered by the committee and the assembly, and we had 73 votes, so we have an increased number of votes. And
Дякую,
Evgenia,
колеги.
the floor is yours.
Дуже приємно, що така конкретна фахова дискусія сьогодні. Що
Thank you
ми
very much. And actually, this is great to have such a professional
і
discussion and
дуже
for discussing
дякуємо
specific
дуже
topics.
Ємануелісу
And
і
now I would like
Єгімантесу,
actually
і
to
власне
thank Emanuelis,
за ідею
Gimantas, and
організації.
Eskander for the idea and for organizing
Я би
this
також хотіла
discussion.
дуже конкретно
And
розповісти, чим грудень
now I would
відбулася
like to
минулого
speak
тижня.
about
Минулого
what
тижня
we have done
зрозуміло, ми прийняли
this
багато
week and
важливих
last
резолюцій,
week.
і
And of course, last week
також
there was a very
як
important
наші
resolution
дипломати,
adopted.
журналісти зараз запитують часто, а як ми можемо
And
практично
journalists
їх
keep
використати
asking me, how can we use
підтягнення
this in
документів
practice?
всі
And
деякі
this is
способи
actually the address to
громадської
Mr. Eskander.
діяльності і так
If
далі,
you
які
have
я вжила,
any
які ми
ideas
можемо
in terms of
використовувати в
using this
Україні в
resolution
цивільних судах,
in
для
international
того, щоб
court, other
родини
platforms
ув'язнених яким чином
to help the families of
покарати
political prisoners and their lawyers,
будемо
we
вдячні.
would be
Тому
really thankful
цього
to
тижня
you
ми
for your
голосували в
ideas.
парламенті
And
України,
this
сподіваюся,
week
продовжили
in the
серію рішень і
Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, we have continued
вчора на позачерговому
adopting
засіданні кінців
series of
України ми
vision, and
прийняли
during
одразу читання
extraordinary
проект
meeting of the
рішення
Verkhovna
про
Rada
місце
initiated
прямо
by the President of
прийняли
Ukraine, we
закон про
adopt
корінні народи, який визнає
we adopted
Конституцію
in
про
two
національний народ.
readings the law
Цей
on
закон
acknowledging
викликав
Crimean Tatars
істерику
as
істерію
indigenous
просто
people.
в
And
усіх
actually, we have now this hysterical response of the Russian Federation.
не знаю, скільки разів вже там
And
тричі попередньо
Putin has, I think, at least 3 times have mentioned this during his interview. And this shows that we were right in adopting this law. And we actually cancelled the free economic zone Crimea that was introduced in 2016. And actually, that was a mistake for Crimea, Crimean Tatars. So we just now
якісь треба було 30 років тому закрити,
keep
деякі одразу після
doing those things
деокупації.
that we should do, for example, 30 years ago,
Хотіла б
7
проінформувати,
years
що у нас
ago.
вже був
And I would also
пакет
like to
гуманітарної
inform you
допомоги,
that if we speak
де я
about
є заступником,
humanitarian
таке
policy
засідання, слухання
committee,
разом з представниками комітету закордонних справ щодо
together with the
центру
representatives of the
організації
Foreign Affairs Committee in terms of protection of the
резолюції
cultural
немає, які
heritage. Of course, there is
а є ще й
huge amount of properties that have been stolen, but there are also the landmark part of UNESCO list which are destroyed. This is the Hansk Palace and Hersonets.
І я собі так уже як поставила за мету
And this is my personal objective now
на резолюцію, які стосуються якраз
to prepare the document for the resolution related to the heritage and the loss of heritage on the occupied territories,
і це мені
including Crimea.
здається,
And I think we can do this also in the parliamentary assembly. We can have a separate document for this. And the Crimean Tatar Resource Center will help us in this process. And if they help us, actually, I'm ready to promote this topic. As for the Magnitsky Act and the Magnitsky type legislation, this is a great idea. And I think that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should raise this issue also as the part of the Crimean platform meeting this year that will involve our partners. And one of the points, one of the topic to be discussed can be this issue. And of course, we will discuss law enforcement issues and some other issues, but we are ready to be for advocacy of this idea. And I think that we should make a separate meeting involving our colleagues from the special committees of the Verkhovna Rada. This is briefly on my side. Thank you very much. And actually, I would rather listen to other participants talk. Thank you, Evgenia. Thank you for describing the specific steps. And I think that now, actually, in Ukraine, on the 4th of March 2021, the Parliament of Ukraine adopted the law on changing Article 21 to ensure freedom of citizens and the legal regime on the occupied territory, which resembles Magnitsky Act, and Mykola Polozov can comment more details about this law simplifying access to legal support of people residing on the occupied territories. And actually, we can consider the cases that are now considered by the occupant courts on the territory of Ukraine and Kiev. And we will discuss this in 3 minutes. But actually, to close the panel of international speakers, I would like to give floor to Mr. Antonio Stang, who is professor and president of the Italian Federation for Human Rights, who have been working in this area for great many years. And I would like to give floor to Antonio Stang. Thank you very much for joining us today, and that really would be very interesting to learn about your view on the proceedings of the Ukrainian parliament and the whole Ukraine. Thank you.
I will be speaking in English, although I understand most of both Russian and Ukrainian, but I cannot speak your language. First of all, I want to say that I was very much impressed also by the interventions of our friends from the Lithuanian parliament, and this is very encouraging. Our colleague said that the United States never recognized the occupation of the Baltic states. I also never recognized that occupation. When I was a younger student in political science, I started to organize events for the independence of the Baltic states, for the restoration of independence. And I don't know if Emanuele Zingeris will remember, but 30 years ago we met in Vilnius. And and I was very happy to meet people of Sayudis and so on. So that is a very significant experience that is very encouraging for Ukraine and particularly for Crimea. The world now, the democratic world, has some important tools, and the Magnitsky sanctions are one of the most important tools. We, with the Italian Federation for Human Rights, that is also the new name of Italian Helsinki Committee for Human Rights, have been always supporting of the Magnitsky sanctions. We organized in the Italian Parliament several events. One of our members is also a member of the Italian Senate, and already 2 years ago he presented a bill for the introduction of Magnitsky kind sanctions in the Italian legislation. This bill is still stopped in the parliament with this very particular political moment that we are facing, but we continue to work on this. And we work also at an international level. We try to cooperate with associations, non-government organizations, and members of different parliaments in the Nordic countries, for instance. I know that Norway is discussing how to implement a similar legislation in Norway. And it's very important that, for instance, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is discussing and pushing for this kind of legislation and instrument. As we everybody know, the European Union never recognized, of course, the occupation of Crimea. It is absolutely impossible by international law to recognize such an invasion and occupation. And that is why the European Union implements several sanctions about Crimea. These sanctions are mostly intended to stop commercial relations, trade, import, export, and so on, affecting Crimea and the special zone of Sevastopol. But there are also individual sanctions that should be more used on this. So the work that our friends of the Crimean Tatar Resource Centers are doing is very important. The list that they elaborated, they presented, of many people that should be targeted as individual personally responsible of important violations of human rights, important abuses. This list can be, in my opinion, instrumental for democratic states and international organizations to understand which kind of persons should be included in their own list. So listing individuals is very important, not only to sanction them, but also as a sort of preventive measures, hopefully to avoid further systematic abuses of fundamental human rights. We are also working to give voice to people, in particular Tatar people from Crimea, that have been specifically persecuted in the last 7 years. And some of them are prisoners. They are part of the so-called prisoners of Kremlin. So absolutely illegally, from the point of view of international law, they are detained and persecuted. We try to give voice to them, to raise their cases, to raise the issue at international public opinion for what we can. So what is extremely important, I think, is to continue this kind of precious work of interaction, expressing solidarity on the one hand, and try to understand together from the best practices, best experiences of every country, how we can do further steps in order to have the situation of Crimea improved. Of course, having in mind the hope that the restoration of the autonomy of Crimea within Ukraine will be realized. The experience of Lithuania is very important on this, as well as it has been for until now, and it is for the case of Belarus, and it is also noticing, as our Lithuanian friend said, that there are countries that can play a role, a new role, because they are coming out from bad periods, but they are on the way to improve their own situation, human rights and democracy standards. And Moldova can be one of the positive examples from this point of view. So I would conclude just saying that we at the Italian Federation for Human Rights, for what we can do also in the relations with the Italian Parliament and with the international organizations, will continue to follow the situation of Ukraine, Crimea, of the Tatar people specifically, and work together with all of you for the best use of all the possible international tools, such as the Magnitsky sanctions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie mille, signore Stengo. Дуже дякую за вашу інтервенцію.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And we would like to thank you and Italy as the country on the whole that continues waiting for 4 different packages of sanctions in the European Council, and that you continue fighting for our Kremlin prisoners. And we are ready to help you to promote these initiatives in the Italian parliament through the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And we cooperate with you within different resolutions despite the political situation. And we have the Russian influence as the political situation. And thank you very much for your expertise, and thank you for sharing your expertise. And this is important for us and for Crimean to raise the voice of Crimean Tatars before its region of the sovereignty of Ukraine. And now I would like to give floor to Nikolai Polozov. And but he will provide the information about his activity, his legal activity, working with really critical cases on the occupied Crimea. But and before that, I would like to give floor to the voice of Crimea. This is a mother of one of the political prisoners of Kremlin, Venera Mustafaeva, who is together with us. And so for us to get her emotions, to get the newest information, and then Nikolai Polozov can provide his analytics, and we'll speak about what we can add to our legislation. How can we use the resolution that have been recently adopted? Because this resolution is also related to support of lawyers in different cases.
Венера, вы с нами?
Venera, we can't hear you. Unmute yourself, please. Can you hear me now? Yes. I would like to welcome everyone. Can you hear me? Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Mustafa Venera. I am the mother of political prisoner of Mustafa. My son was involved in a different activity starting from 2011. He was the part of the NGO organization, but he continued his work after occupation of the Crimea. He monitored the situation in courts, the violation of human rights. He actually was streaming different ransackings and detentions, and he also coordinated the work of different mass media and communicated with a great number of the people. And he understood he was the focus of law enforcement of the occupant power, but he never stopped activity. The main reason to bring my son to criminal responsibility and to imprison him for up to 14 years in the high security prison was his visiting of the mosque where people discussed their love to God. And this meeting was not only the precondition for blaming him for terrorist act, and actually the attempt to organize recall in the Russian Federation. But my son is a peaceful person, and everyone who knows him says that he is a really sincere, conscious, and soft person. And actually, after the occupation of Crimea, my son did a lot within his human rights advocacy, and he have been rewarded with different awards. Amnesty International named him the prisoner of consciousness. And in prison, he continues his human rights advocacy. He continues recording human rights violation in the detention center. He tries to describe what he and other political prisoners are facing now. And the different court sessions, he tries to communicate with the representatives of public authorities. The International Human Rights Advocacy Organization monitored the situation of the figurants of the second Bakhchisaray's group case. My son is not the only political prisoner. A lot of elderly people have been sent to detention centers who are threatened with lifelong sentences. These people are disabled, and they are prosecuted not only because of their religious beliefs or their nationality, but now there is the process of intimidation of the whole Crimean Tatar people. They tried to expel Crimean Tatars from Crimea to substitute our people with the Russian citizens. But our people will never accept this. We will never accept that our sons are called terrorists. This is a label of the Russian Federation, trying to show to the whole world that they do not fight activists or human rights advocates, but terrorists. The Russian Federation keep speaking about these terrorist threats to protect its own interest and tries to use the fears and feelings of the society. Because when people heard the word terrorism, people do not like to think deeper, especially in Russia, where there is a whole generation that was raised threatened by terrorism. People are called terrorists, extremists, because this is a convenient tool to intimidate people. And I, as mother, I would like to speak about health of my son, Surver Mustafayev. There is a lack of light, and that's why he has now been experiencing severe eyesight problems. My son keeps asking to have an opportunity to have access to doctors, to dentists, etc. And he speaks about bad conditions in the detention centers. And actually, he has now problems with his immunity. He suffers toothache, and actually, the only help he gets are just painkillers. And that's why I would like to ask everyone to help my son in this case as well. And we really welcome that now members of parliament organize and make groups to support political prisoners and their families. And this is very important for us, and we would like to this activity to be continued. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much for your intervention. And the question of access to proper healthcare that you've mentioned during your speech is actually a separate point of the resolution that has been recently adopted by the parliamentary. But the Russian delegation says that they are not going to follow this resolution. We have prepared letters for all heads of the political groups for them to consider actually that there is no dialogue, that the Russian delegation refuses to fulfill their liabilities. And actually access to healthcare is actually their obligation. They should provide healthcare, detention centers to political prisoners, to these really strong people as your son. And Mykola Polozov represents actually those lawyers who work in this area. And actually now I would like to discuss with Mr. Polozov how the resolution can be implemented in practice. And actually we can refer to this document because this is an official document for Europe. So the question is how can we proceed with our national legislation, Magnitsky type legislation, and actually would be nice to hear from your wishes and from your expertise in terms of our future work. Thank you, Venera, once more, and I would like to give floor to Nikolai Polozov to learn about your messages and your late analysis. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, the participants of our conference. And this is very important that we keep discussing this issue. But first of all, I would like to remind that in Ukraine, there are certain legislative acts that are related to human rights protection, including the rights of Ukrainian citizens. So this is the law of 2014 with the amendments adopted in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And there is one more important document that was adopted yesterday, the law on the indigenous people of Ukraine. But I would like to have a different perspective on the problem we've been discussing today. Magnitsky Act, that was really very important document that at the legislative level in the United States and in the European countries proved that there is a systematic violation of human rights in Russia. But it is very important to understand that starting from 2020, when the Magnitsky Act was adopted, there have been a lot of changes, including within Russia, and the Russian regime have been becoming less and less sensitive from the pressure outside. Because if in 2012 Putin had to dismiss a range of officials, and now being a part of this list shows actually the level of trust from the Russian authorities. And so sometimes they say it is well done when you get to the list. So they boast of being part of this list. Why? Why is it so? This is because they believe that actually the regime will continue forever as a Reich, that there will be changes. In the Western world, they will have different democratic leaders, and Putin will live forever, and he will cover all those who are involved in committing human rights violations in Russia. And at this stage, personal sanctions are not effective at all, because those who violate human rights, they do not have property abroad in the United States or in the EU countries. Those who have property there, they're not the part of the list. And if we speak about property of Abramovich or Ismanov for properties committed by some Mayor Volkov is very difficult. And actually even Raldulin is not brought to account. And this is so-called purse of Putin. The second issue is that despite crimes against people in Crimea, the West continues sponsoring the Russian and Putin regime through buying resources. And Putin's regime actually lives for the money it gets from wood and other resources. This is Germany, France, who support the regime, and unfortunately, it is so. So they say that policy is separate from business, and we can see the Siemens turbines in Crimea. We can see some Finnish water mechanisms in Crimea. So yeah, they remove foreign company labels from these machinery, but everyone knows about this. Everyone knows about this, but no one does anything against this. That's why we should use radical measures to influence the situation in Crimea, for example, to stop trading with Russia. But who would do this? And what will be response of Russia? Because Russia has nuclear weapons, and Putin has been threatening to use nuclear weapon if someone will act against his will. And of course, the Western world understands that there is a threat related to the nuclear weapon as well. But I believe that implementation of Magnitsky Act in the national legislation of Ukraine is a must to develop a certain network of legislative acts that will ensure protection of rights and freedoms of Ukrainian citizens. Together with the law on indigenous people, it is very important to adopt other legislative acts, for example, on the status of political prisoner that can implement the social guarantees of protection of these people from activities of law enforcement of Russia and other countries, because we understand that the same can happen to Ukrainian citizens in Belarus and in other states and regimes for which human rights are not a priority. Of course, the biggest threat now is from Russia. That's why implementation of the Magnitsky Act and possible persecution of persons who violate human rights of Ukrainian citizens, including on the occupied territory, is our work for future, because we understand that Putin regime will not exist forever and people will remain. And they understand that they would pay for what they are doing now. Maybe in 10, in 20 years, when they will be old, but as the another criminals, they will be found and sentenced for their crimes. That's why it is very important to have these legislative initiatives on the national level. The resolution of Parliamentary Assembly on Crimean Tatars is one of the most important documents that have been adopted during last years in relation to Ukraine and Crimean Tatars. This document already has a record of the crimes committed against Crimean Tatars and Ukrainian cities, both on the occupied territory and in violation of the international legislation were brought to the territory of the Russian Federation. And of course, basing on this resolution, there should be taken action to detect people involved in human rights violations, to implement sanctions against these specific individuals. Perhaps these sanctions will not work now, but in the future they will become the basis for the decisions of international courts, possible international investigation group, and, as I hope, international tribunal, international court, who will consider in detail the actions of the occupant Russian authorities against Ukraine. So perhaps we won't get specific and obvious results now, but this is our work for the future. This helps us to systematize not only as in general the crimes against humanity and the human rights violations, to create a specific list of individuals who are suspects of the crimes and who will have and will be actually brought to responsibility within the court proceeding in the future. And these people should understand that despite some support they are now getting from the Kremlin regime, sooner or later they will have to respond for this. That's why I believe that this legislative initiative should be implemented within the Ukrainian legislation and not as a separate act, but actually in the form of amendments to the laws that have already been adopted, for everything to be interconnected. There should be a transparent tools how to use these sanctions for all individuals involved in human rights violations to have understanding of what he or she can expect in the future in terms of accountability. And the last but not the least, these are social guarantees for prisoners and members of their families. And I'm not expecting this work to be quick, but we should start from something. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, пане Микола. Якщо я не вибачте, я просто голос втратила після Страсбургу.
Thank you very much. I'm still restoring my voice from Strasbourg. And if I'm not mistaken, you are now wearing Vyshyvanka, the national costume of Ukraine, the national shirt of Ukraine. And thank you for your support, even in wearing this T-shirt. I think that Mr. Actually Polozov have made a very important intervention, and I would like to support our work in terms of adopting the resolution. And this is one of the most powerful documents that have been adopted recently, despite the fact that Russia says that this document is just a paper. I would like to thank all members of the Parliamentary Assembly who actually fight the massive Russian lobby. He wanted to postpone adopting this document for autumn. I would like to invite you to the meeting of the Crimean platform scheduled on the 23rd of August to give hope to all families of the political prisoners, even families of those who have missing persons. And Eskander has provided a very important analytics. And recently, I understand that a lot of initiatives related to Crimea should be explained in numbers to show how many victims we have had so far.
Після нашої дискусійної панелі, я думаю, що і я, і Євгенія
As
Кравчук.
for conclusions that have been offered to date, and actually me, Evgenia Samomerov, who is now feeling not so well after the second jolt, the second vaccination jolt, and that's why he can't be with us today. But anywhere, I would like to thank him for this titanic work that he has done for the recent months with our partners, European partners, with Ukrainian MPs, because the very important document was adopted yesterday in two readings, and actually there was a response of Putin, and actually he knows a lot about indigenous people of Ukraine, and actually the ethnogenesis of Crimea should have the same rights as Ukrainian citizens and even more. I would like to say that in our conclusions, we can have two separate units. This is our homework, what we should adopt in Ukraine in terms of Magnitsky type legislation. And me and my colleagues, we rely a lot upon support of the Crimean Tatar Resource Center and lawyers. And for us to be able to work further with sanctions and to take into consideration wishes and actually the success recipes, so to say, that have been voiced today by our colleagues from Lithuania. We should we should not forget about cultural heritage issues, landmarks, and religious landmarks that are now on the occupied territory in Khersones and Bakhchisarai. We should also remember about potential awareness-raising campaigns, and I rely upon support of Mr. Polozov and Mr. Bariev. This is the company's Free and the Name of Imprisoner, and we know well that potentially illegal sentences of Russian courts who illegally act on the territory of Crimea, of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, have now support. And I'm now speaking about the campaign Free Yasipenko. Yasipenko is a journalist who are now waiting for his case to be considered on the 6th of July. And he just showed what happened in Crimea within his professional activity and the Radio Freedom Project, which is called Crim Realia. That's why we need to raise the wave in the media area, and I'm actually would like to have support of my colleagues of the activists for such painful cases not to be limited by by social networks, but actually to be widely supported. We actually we hope for continuation of the sanctions that have been already introduced by the EU countries and the separate documents and resolutions that was adopted already by parliament and senates of different countries. And we hope that future elections in Germany, in Moldova, in other countries of the European subcontinent will be a really direct voting and showing the will of people without intervention of Russian Federation with its tentacles of so-called support of Russian speakers all over the world. And I can say, dear colleagues, that there were a lot of attacks during this week related to the rights of indigenous people, national minorities, and their right for education, not only in Ukraine, but Ukraine and Hungarian, Ukraine in Romanian, Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar languages. And actually, I have prepared the letter. I'm going to send this to all heads of different fractions with the documents that will prove that that what is mentioned by our colleagues from Hungary and Romania is not true. And in July, we are waiting for the mission that will monitor human rights, and hopefully that after a meeting with the committees of the Verkhovna Rada, with the office of president, with the minister, our colleagues from the Parliamentary Assembly in the Council of Europe will make their conclusions that we will be able to get from the monitoring to post-monitoring regime. And I would also like to thank once more to all speakers. Thank you very much. And actually the Crimea Tatar Resource Center for organizing this event, and this is I really would like to thank our foreign colleagues that Crimea is still on agenda of your professional activity, your future activity. And I think that today we've managed to work the roadmap. And I would like now to give floor to Mr. Iskander as the main organizer of this great event. Thank you, Maria. And actually, I would like to thank all the participants of today's meeting for finding time to be with us today. And actually, Venera Harum has mentioned the campaign member of Ukrainian parliament help the Kremlin prisoner. And now actually there is a patronage of MPs of Ukrainian parliament over individual political prisoners. And I would like to address Lithuanian parliament and MPs of other countries to help us notify the members of European Parliament and members of parliaments of other countries who would like to be involved in this patronage campaign over our political prisoners. For politicians not to worry about their reputation, for them to be sure that they will not protect some terrorists, but they will protect those people who fight for their rights and the rights of Ukrainian Tatar people. And now I would like to mention separately the Magnitsky type legislation. For us, it is very important for the European countries to adopt such legislation. If we speak about Lithuanian legislation and the legislation of other Baltic countries, if the person gets in a certain list, and if we speak about prohibition on entry, and if we speak about FSB mayor or some official of the migration service of the Russian Federation that were involved in violation of human rights of our citizens, all of them like to go to Prague, to Italy, to Bali, and a range of Southeast countries have a positive response on sanction policy of the European countries, of the Western countries, and that was proved by the representatives of the and actually those officials, representatives of Russian law enforcement countries would like to go for the vacation to European or Asian countries, and actually they wouldn't like to be deprived of these. And now I would like to thank the MP of Ukraine, Maria Mizantseva, for great moderation, who has made everything possible and tried to do everything possible for the resolution to be adopted by the Parliamentary Assembly. And it has been, as it has been mentioned by Nikolai Polozev, this resolution will be the basis for the court decision, including UN court and European court. And I think that our mutual efforts of Ukrainian MPs, MPs of other countries, such experts as Antonio Stanga, who has devoted a lot of years of his life and work of this issue, and other international specialists will help us to expand the list of the countries who will adopt Magnitsky type legislation against those who violate rights of our citizens. Thank you very much. We'll continue our mutual work.
Дуже дякуємо, друзі.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day. До зустрічі.
Thank you, everybody.